Welcome back to the show. Today I want to share some thoughts with you on they started at the bottom. They started at the bottom. And I chose this area because this is a forest over in Japan because of all these roots that you see here in front of me and behind me and to the side of me. Because I would suggest to you that the people who have made it big time in life have not gotten there by themselves. They have connected with other people in other situations and other relationships that have helped them grow into the people that they are now. So this scene, this setting is very, very intentional. Have you ever looked at famous people and really maybe forgotten what it was like before they became famous? So I did a little homework on just a few people. Let me share a few examples with you. Mariah Carey, the great singer, she was a salon assistant way back when. And the story says before hitting her high notes, Mariah Carey was down low, sweeping hair from the salon floor. It's pretty hard to imagine her doing any kind of labor that she really didn't enjoy. Quote, "It was the pits working in the salon, sweeping hair, that really propelled her to the top." So I would say that most of the people that have reached any level of success didn't get there initially, unless they were born into wealth, unless they were born into some sort of status of any kind. Actor Jim Carrey was a janitor. The story says that he had dropped out of high school when he was 15 years old to work as a janitor to help his family. And in a commencement speech at a college, he spoke about his time supporting his family and what he learned from his father. He said, quote, "You can fail at something you don't want, so you might as well take a chance doing what you love." Let me share it again. He says, "You can fail at something you don't want, so you might as well take a chance doing what you love." I would say to you that there are times when you have to do stuff that you don't like for a period of time to get to a place that you do want to get to. These roots didn't grow overnight. I mean, I could reach down and touch them and they're hard as stone, but they didn't reach that level within a year or two. It took a very long time. Jay Leno was working at McDonald's once upon a time. He started flipping burgers in the 1970s. So he realized that over a period of time, he did that for a little while and then developed his career and his path and his journey in a totally different field, thank goodness. Jerry Seinfeld, we all have heard of him. He was a light bulb telemarketer. He said, "I hated the job. It was horrible. It was all lying, outrageous prices and phony names. I called myself Dave Wilson. You had to come up with a name so people would think they knew you. I'd call and say, 'Hey, Bill, remember I talked to you 18 months ago? It's Dave Wilson.' And the other person doesn't want to insult me, so they say, yeah, I think I remember. He only stayed until he could afford a loaf of bread," the story says. So he had to do stuff that he didn't really want to do and like to do in order to give him some steps to move in a direction that he eventually ended up doing very, very well in. J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter books, she was a secretary and she hated it. She absolutely hated the job until she, over a period of years, decided to get really good at her craft, which obviously is writing books. Hugh Jackman, the actor, the producer, the actor in the X-Files, Wolverine, with the things coming out of his hands. He worked at 7-Eleven and he was fired because he was talking to too many customers. He was fired from 7-Eleven. Aren't you glad he was fired from 7-Eleven? Because now we watch him on the movies all the time, right? So I'm wondering if you and I fail to remember that there are people who have reached the top of their level of success, but they didn't start anywhere near the top. They started really, really low at the bottom. There are just a few examples of these people like this. There's a guy that lived, oh my goodness, about 2,600 years ago or so, maybe more. It was a guy named Nehemiah. And Nehemiah was tasked with a job to rebuild his city. His city had been torn down for a period of time, for over a period of years, and it was not getting any better. Invading armies kept coming in and taking over and destroying more parts of his town. So he had to decide to be proactive about it. He decided to make a difference in his town, which then impacted his people, but then he had to recruit a team of people that could help him because the job was way too big for him to do it on his own. So he did recruit this team, and the team, with his direction and the people that he was able to lead, was able to transform that entire town, and then thus impacting people's lives. So there came a time when some people didn't like what he was doing. So they said that we need to get rid of this guy and stop him from rebuilding the wall because of this reason or that reason. I'm not going to get into that here. But they really tried to distract him from doing what he was attempting to do. So they kept telling him that if he didn't have a meeting with them in this certain town that was a good ways away from where he was working, that he was going to get in trouble, that people were going to start accusing him of things that weren't true. And Nehemiah was very tempted to stop what he was doing, maybe, because he realized that, you know, if I don't maybe follow the advice of these people, maybe people are trying to get at me or whatever. He decided that he was not going to stop what he was doing. He decided that he was going to maintain what he was going to do until it was finished. So the time came when he decided that he was going to follow through with the task at hand that he was offered in order to make a difference in the people's lives. So eventually, over a period of time, within actually a relatively short period of time, he and his team were able to rebuild those walls. That's just one example. His faithfulness, his tenacity, enabled him to change history and to rebuild the outer walls of this city that people still remember this guy some 2,500 years later. There's an ancient text that says, if you're faithful in the little things, you can be faithful in bigger things. If you're dishonest in little things, you won't be honest in greater things. Now think about this a minute. Sometimes you have been given opportunities to do great things that don't look like great things at the time. Sometimes somebody's given you a task to do that at the time you really don't want to do at all. Sometimes the task is, you think, beneath you, or maybe it's a situation where you don't think that you have the patience to do it, or frankly even want to do it because the task is so small, it's labor intensive, you don't feel like it. But I found in my experience, and by reading a lot of other people's experiences, that those little things that you do consistently and with excellence turns into much greater things, because then you've developed the habit of doing things well, whether it's a small thing or whether it's a big thing. Rick Warren said one time, he said, you'll never arrive at the state in life where you're too important to help with menial tasks. Because, in fact, let me give you an example. There was a story about the then CEO of Disney, whose name was Michael Eisner. And Michael Eisner, every time he would see a piece of trash on the ground at one of the parks, he would stoop down, pick up the trash, and put it in the trash can. That, to me, is a very explicit example of what it means to lead from the front. That is, that there's no job too small for you or I to do, no matter what the title is that you have. It's amazing how little things can make a big difference. In fact, let me share a story. The story says, it's amazing how little things can make a big difference, especially in the hands of a typist. When I was in high school, the story says, I took a typing class. Today, I think they call it keyboarding, since very few people use typewriters these days. So I took this class, and I hated it. Every day, we would do what I considered to be stupid exercises. For me, with our left hands, we would type AQ, AW, AE, AR, AT, then SQ, SW, SE, SR, ST, then DQ, DW, DE, DR, DT, then FQ, FW, FE, FR, FT. Can you imagine, if you haven't taken typing classes, how boring that would be? We would switch hands and do the similar exercises with the right hand. This went on for weeks, even months. But what did this little exercise have to do with typing? One day, as I was asking that question to myself in my mind, my teacher must have read my thoughts because she said, today, you are going to type sentences. But how, I thought? You haven't taught us how to type. You've just taught us these stupid little exercises. She handed us our assignments for typing and left the room. I didn't understand how, but I started pecking on that typewriter and words began to form. I started typing quicker and sentences appeared, then paragraphs. I was typing. But how could this be? I learned to type by learning those little exercises. Those exercises taught me discipline. Listen, they taught me where the various keys were located. They taught me how to move my fingers with ease and precision. They taught me how to type. So the end of the story is being faithful in learning little things like typing and AQ and AW and AE and AR, etc. Taught me how to do the big things like typing 60 words a minute and completing top in my class. Now think about that in your own life. How many times haven't you despised doing those little exercises that really you didn't think helped at all? I can remember in Spanish class when I was in school, how the teacher would make us repeat the same things over and over again. I can't even remember them at this point, verbs and nouns and stuff like that. I didn't understand why she was teaching us to do this stuff until much later I realized, she was teaching us the foundation of Spanish. Oh, I wish I could have remembered all those lessons back then. You know, I really realized over the course of years that people who finally make it, they look at their struggles differently than most people. Think about that a second. They look at their struggles differently than most people. Many of them, I think, also, they deconstruct what's getting in their way to be able to overcome smaller hurdles in their way. They deconstruct it. The old saying is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? You can't eat an entire elephant, or you can't take control over a huge situation, but you can do it a piece at a time. I can remember when the construction people were building our home, I couldn't see the end result. My wife could see it, the architect could see it, the builders could definitely see it, but I couldn't see it. So as the house was being built, the foundation dug and the walls and the flooring and the inside walls and eventually the roof, then I could see it. But the people who had built the buildings before or who had a vivid imagination more than I did could see it. I couldn't see it at the time. Faithfulness is really a big thing too. These guys who started off flipping burgers or working at a store or doing hair or cleaning up hair, they didn't start doing their job halfway and still became excellent at some craft. But what I'm saying is you have to do stuff with excellence no matter how big or small that task is. It took me a little while to learn that. I mean, I was in my 20s before I got that through my thick head, that if I do things with excellence on the small things, that when I get to a position in life, then the big things I'm going to want to do with excellence as well. Robert Morgan wrote, he said, faithfulness isn't defined by a solitary act or achieved in a single day. It's a long obedience in the same direction. Again, it's a long obedience in the same direction. It's like, faithfulness is like a string of jewels. You know, when you look at a piece of jewelry, a string of jewels, you can probably spot the one that's not so good. I don't want to be that one that's not so good. I would hope that you don't want to be one that's not so good either. So doing things the right way all the time is really important. That drives some people I know really, really bonkers. When they go to do stuff and they leave stuff undone or they don't complete something, it's a not good characteristic to have if you really want to go places in life. J. Oswald Sanders said one time, if we sincerely plan out our day along the line suggested to the best of our ability, we can and must leave it there. He said this, we should refuse to get into the bondage of what has not been done. That is, that you can do only what you can do, but you need to do that with excellence. We had some people come in once upon a time, years ago, when we were in the process of getting ready to move in the house, and their job was to paint the upstairs hallway. Just paint the upstairs hallway, a plain color white. It took me, I'm embarrassed to tell you, a little while, actually a long while, to be honest with you, to see that they missed quite a bit of stuff, quite a bit of spaces in that hallway. They just missed it entirely. They missed spaces of painting. Well, maybe they weren't doing it with precision. Maybe they didn't have a passion to do things with excellence. I wonder how many of you, maybe you haven't done things to your best of ability and tried to get by with doing it halfway. I'm asking you today to do it not to do it halfway. There's a story back in about 2,100 years ago about this employer who gave his 3 employees some money to invest. He was going away on this long trip, and one of the guys, he was given a sum of money, a good chunk of money, and another guy a little bit less, and the next employee a little bit less, based on their abilities, based on their history with this employer. But he knew that they had the experience and the ability to get a return, to get a very good return on his investment. So he went away on the trip, and the first guy, who was given the most money over a period of months, he doubled his money. He got a good return on his money. So the next guy, he also doubled his boss's money. He invested it very, very well and was able to make his boss happy. So the next guy, he decided, I don't want to tick off the boss, so I'm going to go and literally bury under the ground the money that this boss gave me to invest. Because, if I mess up, I don't want to tick him off. I don't want to upset him. So the boss eventually came back into town, and he pulled the employees in and wanted to see what they have done with their money. So the first guy comes in, and he says, I've invested your money. Here's your return, a good amount of money. Man, the boss was happy, and he gave him even more responsibility. He gave him, a raise. He gave him more job titles to do, and he did very well. The next guy comes in. He does the same thing, has the same conversation. A real good guy. Made money on his boss's money, and he was very happy. Third guy comes in and started to make excuses why he didn't follow through on what his boss wanted him to do. So the boss got really upset. I'm not getting into all of what he did, but it wasn't a pleasant situation because he chose to take the easy way instead of really using his brain in order to get a return that he had the capacity to do. That's the big thing in this story, that he had the capacity to get a return on this guy's money, but chose not to because he was afraid. He allowed his emotions to overrule what he was trained to do by this boss. There's a story, there's a movie that was out several years ago called The Pursuit of Happiness. It's a story about Chris Gardner, who was homeless. He had a small child, but he had a desire. He had a goal to work in the investment field. So I just want to share a piece of his story. It's a real short story out of his book called The Pursuit of Happiness. He says he was physically abused by his stepfather as a child and placed in a foster home. And Gardner's woes didn't leave him as he grew up to be a father himself. As shown in the movie, Gardner struggled with homelessness while raising his kid. It was the strength of the lessons he learned from his mother that he went from rags to riches by tenaciously building himself to be the CEO. He said, the future was uncertain. The future was uncertain, absolutely, and there were many hurdles and twists and turns to come. But as long as I kept moving forward, one foot in front of the other, listen, the voices of fear and shame, the messages from those who wanted me to believe that I wasn't good enough would be stilled. Let me share that last sentence or two. He says, the voices of fear and shame, the messages from those who wanted me to believe that I wasn't good enough would be stilled because he kept going forward. Even though at the moment he was homeless. He didn't allow his current situation to dictate what his future was going to look like. And I think you struggled with that. I know I've struggled with that. To look at what you're going through right now and find it difficult to imagine what it would be like when it was better. Chris Gardner chose to keep believing in his own abilities. Michael Hyatt was a publisher. He ran a large publishing company, and he now owns his own companies. He says, I would say that sometimes the most radical thing you can do with your life is simply to be faithful. Simply to be faithful. To keep doing the things that you need to do every day, whether or not you feel like doing them. That's kind of like the example of these roots around me. The roots became the way they are because by nature they kept growing and reaching out and connecting. And I would suggest that you and I both need to expand our roots to build more connections in our lives in order for not only us to grow consistently, but also to help other people grow as well. Author Chuck Swindoll said one time, leadership has more moments of the mundane than the magnificent. Again, leadership has more moments of the mundane than the magnificent. I would say that the majority of people who have made it in a big way make it because they are more faithful than everybody else who stops and starts and stops and starts and stops and starts. That's how these people who bulk up at the gym, they bulk up so much is because they're consistent with it day in and day out, and they push themselves through some very difficult times in order to build the bulk that they're trying to build. John Harbaugh, who is right now, from the day of this taping, is the head coach of the team. He says, do whatever you can do to help others be their best, not for where it takes you, but rather where it takes the organization. So if you and I choose to invest in people's lives that are going places, that it's for the greater cause, then I would suggest to you that it impacts you directly and indirectly. So to be tenacious through some of the most difficult times in your life, it means giving all that you have, but not more than you have. I think at times that you can't give anymore, that maybe you're just empty, that you don't have any more to give. But I would suggest to you that you have more to give than you think you have. Maybe you think that you don't have what other people have. That's okay, because you don't need to have what other people have. You have what you have. And if you leverage what you have for the benefit of other people, then that's where strength really grows from. Quitting should happen when the job's done, not when you get tired. I mean, there's times when I'm at the gym, when I'm doing my curls, and I don't want to do another 20. I really don't, because I do sets of 20 and 25. Again, I studied that online to figure that out. But anyway, so there's times when I want to stop at 12 and 13 and 14. I don't want to go up to 20 or 25 and sometimes even 30 reps. And it's just like, it hurts, it burns, it aches. But if I stop and don't push, then what doesn't happen? Growth doesn't happen. Growth happens when you push consistently. One guy who ran the United States once upon a time by the name of Calvin Coolidge, he goes, nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. He said, talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful people with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of uneducated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. The slogan, press on, has solved and always will solve the problems of the human race. Think about this a minute. I've been privileged to be a student of a lot of different people. And some of these people are younger than me. In fact, a percentage of them are younger than me. And some of these people, because of their desire to push through some very, very difficult times, have taught me that I have nothing to complain about. And if you take a moment or two to look around the people in your life that have gone through so many difficult times in their lives, and they seem to keep getting back up again over and over again, and they put a smile on their face, and sometimes they just keep doing stuff that you can't imagine them doing, knowing what they've gone through. But it's their decision to keep getting back up and to keep pushing forward, when maybe you don't even know it on the inside. Maybe you don't know that they're dying on the inside. Maybe they're broken, they're crying on the inside, but they keep getting back up no matter what. I'm asking you to consider that part of your life, that regardless of what you've gone through, regardless of what you've been through, regardless of the pain and the agony that you and I are going through today, that's difficult to even stand up and do what you're doing, to just take one more step. Just take one more step for the hour, for the moment, for the benefit of people that you may never meet. Realizing that failure and failing is a part of that journey. Falling on your face over and over again is part of that journey to get to a place where you will push yourself through some of the darkest days of your life. I'm going through it, and I assume that some of you are going through it also. So remember, one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, persistence, tenacity is incredibly important to reach the next level in your life. My name's John Carver, and I thank you for watching. We'll talk soon.